Second. Okay, 1 second. Save a second. Oops. Okay, forget about this then. Okay. What I want to do is wrap up the mitzvah of covered Talmud. I'd like to wrap up the mitzvah of covered Talmud Chacham, covered Rabbi, and I think we presented at least the issues in the Ram Sefer HaMitzvos. The Ram Mishnah Torah has always been for me, I must say, and I'll just present the issues and we'll leave it like that, okay? The mitzvah in the Protei Mitzvah in Hilchos Talmud Torah, the Ram says, L'chaved melamdeha v'yoideha. So the first one on the list is melamdeha, l'cher, that's Rabbi Muvok. And yoideha, l'cher, is a Talmud Chacham. And the interesting thing is, he was makdim Rabbi Muvok to Shal Talmid Chachamim. And once he does that, a priori, one should assume that the covered rabbi is not an extension of covered Talmud Chacham, but it's something which stands on its own. Which is not exactly the impression you get over here from Sefer HaMitzvos. So now this is where the problems start, you understand? So a priori, you would assume that it's ki'ilu 2 mitzvahs. But since they're inyan echad, he doesn't count it as 2. And the mitzvah of Mechabed Rabbi has its own source, and the mitzvah of Mechabed Chacham has its own source. But since it's inyan echad, it's one mitzvah minyan, which is very different from what the Rambam is presenting over here. And here you get the impression the mitzvah is to Mechabed Talmud Chacham, and Rabbi is an extension of that, and Meira and Kavod all go into this. So I can't say I'd be very convinced. It sounds like somewhat convincing, but I want to show you in Mishnah Torah proper, you have the same type of thing, because in Mishnah Torah there are 2 prakim about Kavod. There's Perek Hey and Perek Vav, and Perek Hey is about Rav Muvok, and Perek Vav is about Talmud Chacham. So here again, he's mocked him in the prakim that you can talk about Rabbi Muvok even before you talk about Talmud Chacham. And he also quotes the Yechayiv Lamoid b'fnei Rabbi Muvok in Perek Hey of Talmud Torah. Halacha Zayin. V'chayiv Lamoid mipnei Rabbi mishirenu mirochok m'lo einov ad shischasenu yischasem mimenu v'lo yire koimosei v'akach yeshe. Okay. Now, let's see how he formulates the chiyuv amid b'fnei Talmud Chacham. In Perek Vav, Halacha Aleph, he says, Kol Talmud Chacham mitzvah lahadroi. The af al pi she'eno rabbi shenem mipnei seva toku. So there's an apology that maybe the mitzvah midah should be only rabbi. And a chiddush, even though he's not rabbi, you have to stand for him. And if the whole mitzvah of standing for rabbi is derived from standing from chacham, this sentence doesn't make any sense.
Mhm.
Then, on the other hand, the Rambam starts Perek Hey like this. Perek Hey v'chos Talmud Torah Halacha Aleph Kishem she'odem mitzvah b'choved oviv v'yirosei kach hu chayiv b'choved rabbi v'yirosei yesem me'oviv she'oviv me'bi l'chayim habo she'oviv me'bi l'chayim l'mazeh v'rabbo she'limdei chochmo me'bi l'chayim habo Ro avedis oviv v'avedis rabbi shel rabbi kredemis l'shalom. So l'chayra, what he's presenting is exactly what he has over here in Sefer HaMitzvos, that the kavod rabbi is greater than kavod oviv. So l'chayra, the whole source of kavod rabbi is only Yafusa. It's not mefurish b'kra. So I can imagine you can extend the mitzvah because of a yafusa, which we will talk about a little bit more maybe later, mitzvah Hashem. But how can you talk about and start off and there's covered melamdeho, v'loimdeho, and kilu, two separate mitzvahs, but the inyan echod, so therefore the one mitzvah, you cannot postulate a mitzvah of kavod melamdeho based on this yafusa. It's diametrically opposed to Shiur Sheni. So even though, and this I think I mentioned to you, Daniel Abavli, when he's talking about Aseh Elokecha Tira, he seems to say you can expand a mitzvah through Midas HaTorah. And Biskarov, in Chidush Mo and Riz Alevi, Al Rambam, in Chus Malchos Usus, he says you can extend, you can expand on the mitzvah, on the lav of Einain, and extend it to Kochim through a limud, even though it's not mefurish b'kra. But you certainly can't postulate a mitzvah based on a limud. So everything here is crying that the kavod of melamdeho, of the rabbi, is an extension of kavod Talmud Chacham. But the seder in Mishnah Torah, in the Protei Mitzvahs, the seder of the halachas, Perek Hey, which is kavod rabbi before Perek Vav, and the lashon that the chiyuv of amida of a chacham is afal pi she'eino rabbi, you get the opposite impression. So this is a problem, so chiyun, but I just wanted to point out this whole structure of Mishnah Torah seems to be calling out that it really should be two separate mitzvahs. But it's one Indian. I don't know how you can do such a thing. Now I'm going to mention something just as an epilogue to this mitzvah. There's something more in the Nevuchim, which I'll read to you, which I can't say I understand. Okay? Partially, I do understand it. The Rambam more in the Nevuchim Chilek Gimel Perek Lamed Vav. V'kovod Chachmei HaTorah Gam Kein Mivua HaToeles She'im lo yiu gedolim be'enei b'nei Odom u'mechubodim lo yishmu el divreim b'ma she'yashiru elov min hadeis v'mais. So Bekitzer, he says the reason why there's a mitzvah called chachamim is you should respect them. And once you respect them, you listen to them. And you listen to them, and they'll help you fix up your midas and your maas. Which, okay, is reasonable. Ubechlal zeis HaMitzvah. So it's not that, in other words, it's interesting that the kavod is to develop within you a feeling of respect. It's not since you respect him, you stand up, but it's just the opposite. You're standing up in order to nurture within you the idea of respecting him. Okay, say. Then he has a line, which is amazing. Ubechlal zeis HaMitzvah gam kein. It's in this mitzvah, okay? We're not something that's like from outer space. It's part of this mitzvah, okay? Ubechlal zeis HaMitzvah gam kein lehisnaheg beboishes ubanov. He says that the chacham, even though the mitzvah is to respect him, but the chacham has to act with shame and humility. And it's not stam and eita teva kamashma, it's part of the mitzvah. I don't know how that happens, but that's what he says. He says, B'chlal zeis ha-mitzvah gam kein, l'snaiga b'she v'anov, what's-aloyma omroi mipnei seva tokum. Mipnei seva tokum is the chacham has to act with boishes and anov. So I don't know how it's part of the mitzvah. It's nai that you can't only such a person in machabed. I just don't get what he's saying. It is true that the Gemara says that the chacham shouldn't walk in a way that everyone has to stand up and try to mamayik the cover that he gets. So Poshit, I always thought it's B'teres Midas. It means that's the Etzem Mitzvah. That the Chacham has to try to mind his covered and the Am have to be Mechaber him. What was it do with the Mitzvah? What do you see as they say B'tokum? So I just don't get it. But the Moed Nevuchim is what it is. And we have to go on. Now, next. Reish Yud. Not sure how much I'll add, maybe here and there, whatever it is. Reish Yud. VaMitzvah ho Aseh u'Mosayim hi shetzivonu lechabed av be'en. V'hu omro yis'aleh kabed es avicha ve'esimecha. Ukvar hizba'avu mishpatei mitzvah zo besalmut. V'rubai v'ikor b'kedushin, v'loshin sifro, ezehu kovod, machil, u'mashke, malbish, u'machase, machnis, u'motzi. See here, I assume what the Ram is trying to do is we'd have no clue what kovod is. Is the mitzvah to stand up for your father and mother? What exactly is it? So the mitzvah is machil, mashke, malbish, umachase, machnis umotzi. Is to, I assume what it means is to help with basic life skills. If they are not able or whatever. Machil umashke. So I guess they're picking up the cup. You're not sure what's happening. Or even if they can't, malbish umachase machnis umotzi. You understand yourself, as I pointed out. This is very different from Chacham, from Rabbi Muvok. So it's understandable, each with its own definition of what kavod is. But is it possible, on one hand, to learn a kal v'chomer that Oviv is maybe l'olam hazeh and Rabbi is maybe l'olam habo, and to have a mitzvah kavod of Rabbi based on kavod Oviv, and the definition of kavod b'chlal is very different, as each one is in its own definition? I guess that's what's happening over here. I don't see any other way. However, for whatever it's worth, and I'm not sure how much it's worth, and I'm not sure, I think Maseches Derech Eretz is not really a Masechta. It was written by the Gerim Eretz Yisrael, maybe I'm wrong, but listen to this. In Maseches Derech Eretz, Perek Vav Halacha Gimel, V'ezeu HaMechabed, Machil Umashke, Malbish Umanil, Umoitzi, Echod Horav, Fi Echod Chochom. So what the Maseches Derech Eretz has done something which I didn't find any reference in the Rambam, but has basically equated Kibud Av, the aim, and Kibud and Kibud Rabbi. Echod Horav, Echod Chochom. And not only Rav and Chochom, and that's the same thing. The kitza is Echod Rav, Echod Chochom is Machil and Mashke, Malbish. It's Malbish, an amazing thing. Now, next, nothing more to say about that. It is what it is, but it's an amazing thing. Mitzvah Reshud Aleph, mitzvah Achas Esrei Umosoim. He shetzivonu lira me'ov ve'em, vuhu, and here's an amazing thing, vuhu sheyisnayeg imohem kiminug mi sheyore mimenu shanisheyu kmo yamelech v'yelech imohem kiderech sheyelech im mishi mefachem imenu. The translation over here is v'yira me'agir imenu mashinim yimas. Now, the translation over here is very poor. At least, I don't know who me ani, but in between, I just don't understand what he's saying. Kapach, let me read to you the way he translates it. And this, I think, I make some sense out of it. V'hu shenach Hashem, nechashvem, b'malas mishim rei mimenu. You should, your mindset, it should be like someone who you're afraid of. Umanish k'moy melech. You look at him as someone who you should be afraid of. In other words, that's the way you should think about him. V'nisnaheg imohem kimisnaheg imi shirei mimenu. The two things. There's one thing that your mindset is someone who you're afraid of, that you can get an oinish from. And secondly, that you interact with him in a way that's someone who you're afraid of. And you're afraid to do to them, it's constant being petrified, okay? It's like, we have to know where the Ram got this from. It's like an amazing, a different way See, I would have said that a Moira Av is basically you act with him as if someone you act who you have Moira from. But the Rambam clearly says it's not enough. That you have to look, you have to, in your mindset should be someone who you're afraid of. And it's the opposite. And once you have that, based on that, there's a step, Nachshevein, and after Nachshevein, it's Nisnaeg. It's 2 steps. Now, here, if you compare this to what we spoke about in Misraim, there is Yira, and it comes from Meira'ah ve'ein, but there's no Nachshevein. L'cheira, once Chazal say that it's Chilek al Shechina, you don't have to have a great imagination over here. So it's very interesting how we derive these things. That see, I could imagine, therefore, it shouldn't be the mitzvah. That Yiras Rabbi shouldn't be Yiras Aveim, but it's only a limud, and then we learn that it's an extension of Kovod Talmud Chacham. I'm not sure that helps, but it's a thought. And he says, what is it? So I would have assumed that the Rambam is learning the definition of Meira from here, from the Sefer. Ezo Meira, lo yeshi b'mekoymoi, v'lo medaber b'mekoymoi, v'lo yisei says dvorov. See here, in a certain way, it's very similar to a rabbi and Avein. But the question is, because there's a din of lo yeshiv mekoymoi, lo medaber mekoymoi, lo yisei dvorov, the Rambam learned that you couldn't imagine such a thing unless you looked at him as someone who you're afraid of, that'll be manish you, and you're misnaigi talk. If it's true, maybe, I don't know, because it's not clear at all where the Rambam got this, and there's no mention of this in Mishnah Torah. Next, so l'cheira, when you're going to pair it to your Shemayim, there's a mitzias that you overcome by whether it's your Reimus or your Einish. There's a being whose infinity is just it's not big enough. Okay, so it's not that you're nachshavim. There's something real, and the question is, when it's a Talmud Chacham, is it real, or it's just that you have a mindset like that, and it's unclear at all. Okay. Interesting is that the way the Talmud Bavli presents this mitzvah and the way the Sefer presents the mitzvah is a little different. And as to be expected, the mitzvah, which is defined by the Pirush Makumo, and Stam Sifra as the Pirush Makumo, is basically defined by the Sifra over here, and that's all the Ram quotes. But when it comes to Mishnah Torah, the Ram quotes Talmud Bavli, because the psak it's a very strange thing. I don't know how you can do such a thing, but the psak is like Talmud Bavli, Avinu Avashi, but Stam Sifra is a Pirush Makubal, and Sefer Mitzvahs go like the Sifra. And therefore, when it comes to Gemara Kedushin, Alam Aleph from the base, Torah Bon Ezel Moira, Ezel Kol Kabod, Moira Loyam Mekoim Liyeshim Mekoim Liyisis Devolv, Volei Machriya. And exactly like that, he paskins in Ilchus Mamrim. Ezel Moira, Ezel Kabod, Moira Loyam Mekoim Liyeshim Mekoim Liyisis Devolv, Volei Machriya Devolv. And the rest of it is also V'lo yikra lo b'shmo lo b'chayev lo b'moisai eloma b'mori Hoy Hashem Aviv Hashem Rabba Hashem Acheim B'shan Shmom. This is all in the Gemara, not in the Sifra. So maybe it's not a stira. It's just that the Talmud Bavli expounds on it greater, and in a Sefer Halacha, you have to be more precise, maybe. Now, let's go on. Here, so I can't say I understand everything over here. But this, I think I have some idea of what's going on in the next mitzvah. Reish Yud Beis. Mitzvah Hashtayim Esrei Mosayim 2012. He shetzivonu lifrois v'lirbois. So lirbois is the Kapach points out that the literal translation of the Arabic word could be lahoilid. And we'll see that this is very, very important. The mitzvah requires birth, just to be involved in the procreative act is not the mitzvah. The mitzvah is that it should be results, and we'll see more about that. And then it says, "Ulechavein l'kiyum amin." So this a priori is very difficult, or very odd, or very interesting. I'm not sure exactly how to look at it. It means that the person who is involved in the procreative process has to mechaven that I want the Homo sapiens should be maintained. That should be the human race, and there's a din of kavanah, and it's key part of the mitzvah. Before I get involved in anything more, there's no mention of this in Mishnah Torah that you have to be mechaven for kiyum amin. Now, the Arabic word is katzad, okay? And you could be certainly translated as lechaven or leskaven, as even Tibin and Kapach. And in the other places also, you'll find it. It's clear there's an issue of kavanah. However, if you recall, in Shiur Shir Aleph, when the Ram is talking about Chelis and Lavan having matora achas, one purpose, he uses the word al-katzad, which is in the, is a noun, it's not a verb, but there it means matorah. Lefisha matorah, b'tzitzis, leman tizkur. So I'm not sure in the verb or the noun is the issue over here more so in terms of the purpose of the procreative act, or it's talking about actually to have kavanah for kiyum amin. The Rambam in Pirush Mishnayos uses the noun al-katzad when he's talking about the procreative act. The Rambam Pirush, that I thought was a very important find, at least to help us over here. The Rambam Pirush Mishnah in Sanhedrin, Perek Zayin, Mishnah Dalet. Shenizbarer, shematoras, that's the al-katzad. Shematoras hamishgal, habiyah. He kiyum amin, lo hano belvad. So here clearly he's talking about a purpose, and he's talking about kiyum amin, and that's in the Pirush Mishnah. So I think it's safe to assume, especially since in Mishnah Torah there's no reference at all to kavanah in Puruvu, so you can imagine that it's a matorah, the purpose of the mitzvah kiyum amin. Okay. The Ram has a line here which is very similar in Mishnah Torah to this Pirush Mishnah, that the Matos HaMishkal Hi Kiyum Amin Mulah No Bovad, and that he has in Hilchos Yisui Bia Perek Chaf Aleph Halacha Tes V'Afa Pi Kain Midas Chasidus Shelo Yakel Odem Es Roishai Lekach Ukishei Kadosh Atzam B'Shas Tashmis Kamo Shebianu B'Hilchos Deis V'Lo Yosir Miderech Ha'olam U'Min Hagoi She'ein Dover Zeh El Kedei Lifrois B'Lilbois. I assume the purpose of the procreative act is to have children. So here we go again. The question of the translators mean l'chavein l'kiyum amin, or the matorah is kiyum amin. Is there din kavanah here in Sefer HaMitzvos? However, there are, in a certain way, you can just talk about the idea of purpose in beer, and I'll explain to you what I mean. One, why is it that the mitzvah puruvu is by having a son and a daughter? And the reason is because by having a son and a daughter, there's kiyum amin. And if the matorah of the mitzvah is kiyum amin, it makes a lot of sense that this should define the mitzvah. And I'll read to you the Rambam Pirush Mishnayos in Perek Vav, Mishnah Zayin, in Yevomis. Ubeis Hillel Sevrim, ki Moshe pirish min ha'isha machmes metzias hanavur etzloi tomid ve'ein luma l'menu l'shar odom el HaMitzvos zocho u'nekeva shebehem kiyum amin kloima v'zcholim u'nekevis. So the Rambam is very clear that kiyum amin defines the mitzvah. And this we saw also in Shiur Aleph that the Matorah defines the mitzvah, and that's what we decided it can make it into one mitzvah or two mitzvahs. And the reason why Tchelis and Lovon is one mitzvah because the Matorah Achas, even though Tchelis is not Makiv Lovon, Lovon not Makiv is Tchelis. So the Matorah, the purpose of the mitzvah can be defining factor. So here also, the defining factor of what the mitzvah is, that it's Zochel Nekeva, is because the mitzvah, the Matorah, is Kiyum Amin. Similar also, another halacha. Listen to this. Perek Tezvav of Hilchos Ishus halacha Vav. Hoy lo bonim b'giyusai, a Gentile had children. V'nizgaye hu v'hein. His son and his daughter were mizgaye with him. Harezeh kiyum mitzvah zu. He was mekayim this mitzvah. Hoy lo bonim v'hu eved v'nishtacher hu v'hein lo kiyum mitzvahs kiyum v'yuvah. Ad shiyolet achash nishtacher. She'eved ein lo chiyus. Yichus. But here, it's even though Gash and his guy can cut and but since the guy has yichus and he has a ben robas, so he's yotze. So the Ma'aseh mitzvah is beer. B'shas Ma'aseh mitzvah is a guy. So it's the fact that there's a boy and a girl who are alive is the mitzvah. There's no the Ma'aseh mitzvah is just the attempt to procreate, but the mitzvah is the mitzias of Ben Ubas. And if he's mizgaya afterwards, and they're mizgaya, so you're kind of the mitzvah. So l'chayra, that's because that's the matter of the mitzvah. Next, so amazing. V'zeis hi mitzvahs pir v'ribya. V'omo yis'aleh puruvu. So this is very confusing because we have no clue what pasuk you're referring to. The chinuch is mefurish, referring to the pasuk in Parshas Bereshis. But there's a Lashon Puruvu in Parshas Noach twice, Perek Tes Pasuk Aleph and Perek Tes Pasuk Zayin. And we have no clue of where what the Rambam is talking about. I'm not getting involved. The Kapach is source himself from his aura in the Pirush Mishnah Avos and Perek Mishnah Aleph to what he says over here. And there's an aura from Chaim Heller and the various Yalchud Nusras. This in Frankel in Chosisha's Perek Tezvav Alach Aleph. I'm not getting involved in that. It's not clear at all from the Rambam, the text, what pasuk the Rambam is referring to. Now, here's interesting. Farbiahu, that means the Matiki Ashmur, she'achosan eno chaye b'kriyas shma kishenosa b'sur. V'somo tam l'zeh heyoisei isik b'mitzvah. Or they said the tam is because isik b'mitzvah. So l'cheira, just a simple interpretation. The Rambam learns that the two of Isaac mitzvah means that you're Isaac in one of the Tayyad mitzvahs. If what you're Isaac in is only the Rabbanon or not a mitzvah in the minyan, there wouldn't be Isaac mitzvah. That's what he's assuming. So he's bringing a raya that there's an Isaac mitzvah, Kishnosa Besula, that a raya doch is a mitzvah puvu. That's what he's saying. It's an amazing thing. When you look and you learn the second parak of Brachos, that Chosan Eino Chayiv B'Kriyishma Kishnosa B'Sula and Oisik B'Mitzvah or Tolud, whatever, Oisik B'Mitzvah, there's a Raydoch, there's a mitzvah, approval. And the question is, that what do you have to be so, what is it to bring a proof for? The pasuk is b'lashon mitzvah, unless sometimes it's b'lashon bracha, but there certainly is a pasuk which is b'lashon mitzvah, and halachas gedolos also counts the mitzvahs kumbasei pre-rivia. It is true. The Rav Sadigoin leaves it out, but I think the kash is more as Rav Sadigoin than, that the Ram has to go out to prove it. Chais. The Ram does the same thing in the Pirush Mishnayos and Brachos. That he says that there's a mitzvah puvu and there's an Isaac mitzvah, and that's Nosar Psula. And he does it another time. He does it in Meseches Legoyim Pirush Mishnah. In Perek Gimel Mishnah Beis. Ulefikach Chosan Shu Isaac b'mitzvah b'mitzvahs pre-review or Shar Odom Beregel, or a person in the regel itself, Shigam Isaac b'simchas haregel, Mamtinan loy ad shigmas haregel, o es a chasna. So what is the Isaac b'mitzvah that you don't look at the nigei chosan? It's the mitzvah pre-review. So but he goes on, he says, Kach beisay ubegodov im noile be'en saras ein lo yinoisay ad li'ach regel or a chasana kedei shlo yisatsev b'shum oifon b'oifenei me'oifenei ha'atzvus. He shouldn't be melancholy. So understand, melancholy in the mitzvah Simchas Yontov is a stira to Simchas Yontov. But melancholy is a stira to the mitzvah Puruvu. Is a din that it has to be b'simcha, or it just in Hechatimsim will only happen in b'simcha. It's a very strange thing what the Ram does. Rabbi Nachmanel has a different pshat. Rabbi Nachmanel says there's a mitzvah simcha and shivish me'amishte, and the chos is chayav l'smoyach, and that's the stira to atzvus. Rabbi Nachmanel moy cotton, zayin beis, kal v'choymish mantinan loy b'mei chasunosoi u'minei haregel shemitzvah l'smoyach bohen. So he has a mitzvah simcha. Even by chosa. So it means there's no raya by puruvu. We're not talking about puruvu over here. So the Rambam, whatever it is mechalik between oisek b'mitzvah and oisek b'mitzvah is dafka with tirda, and that's why the chosin is only potter ad yom revi'i, whatever. And there's another thing that there happens to be, it's very interesting that the regel of a chasna, according to the Rambam here in Sefer HaMitzvos, is a regel of the mitzvahs Kriya V'Rivya. And since it's a regel of mitzvah Kriya V'Rivya, you shouldn't do something antithetical to him. He's not an oisek b'mitzvah in the sense of Torah, but that is the mitzvah of the regel. He says, that's what he says it. He says it. Osha. That's it. B'shum. B'simchas haregel mamtinu loy. Elfil chosan shu oisek b'mitzvahs kriya v'rivya. You see, he's learning that the whole shiva, he's an oisek in kriya v'rivya, but the tirda is only until Yom Revi'i. So the ptur of oisek b'mitzvah, which only goes together with Torah, is until Revi'i. But the fact that you don't see Negoim, which will be a stira to the simcha of Shivas Yemei HaMishta, which is the simcha of Puruvu, that you have, because you don't need the ptur of Torah, the voice of a mitzvah. The fact that he's a voice of a mitzvah, that itself is a reason not to see the goyim of a chosr, because it's a kal v'chomer that madoch that for dvar rishus you wait. Here he's oisek a mitzvah. It's not an oisek mitzvah potem in a mitzvah, but it's an oisek mitzvah he wouldn't see in the goyim. And therefore, since the mitzvah, the oisek of mitzvah is only with Torah, it's only with psula, and that's the Rambam says in Pirush Mishnah. In Brochus Peri Beis Mishnah Hey, Ein Odom Nifta B'Kriyishma Elikein Hoya Liboy Torah B'Dvar Mitzvah. Lefi Shoisem Mitzvah Potem in a Mitzvah, and the oisek mitzvah is only Torah. Lefi Kan Oisek Psula Potem B'Kriyishma calls man Shalei Bola V'Vinei Shaliboy Torah. Shem loyim ser psula. V'harihu gam oisek b'mitzvah. Kloim b'mitzvahs kriya v'rivya. Avol im nosa almona. So it's an amazing thing that the Torah and the oisek have nothing to do with each other. The Torah is maybe he won't find it being a psula. And the oisek mitzvah is the priya v'rivya. And they combine that the Torah makes us, that the question of how the things come together. It's mamash pella. And nothing to do with each other. The Torah happens to be the beer, which happens to be the procreative act. But his tirda is nothing to do with the mitzvah. The tirda is maybe she'll be a psula. And that's enough. That's the monkey wrench that makes it oisek b'mitzvah. The fact that he's oisek in the beer, that's not enough. It's the tirda, and the tirda has nothing to do with the mitzvah. It just happens to be somehow involved with beer. It's an amazing thing. Next. Mitzvah Shem, we're not finished with this. We'll see about this more, but this, for the moment, in terms of the relationship between Puruvu to Chosan and what the Ram is saying over here, Mitzvah Shem, have to pick this up in the next mitzvah. But now, just let me add one thing here. The Ram says at the end over here, Ubebeyo, 1 second, V'kvar hisba'aru mishpatei mitzvah v'hamischayiv mimeno בפרק שישי מיבומוס, ומצווה זו אין אנושים חיובס בו. ובבי אומרו, in the Mishnah Yevomis, פרק ווב, Mishnah ווב, או איש מצווה פרי ויביא, אבל לא יהיה אישה. The Gemara in Yevomis has various limudim over here, but I want to just suggest that according to the Rambam, these limudim are irrelevant. Because the Rambam Pirush Mishnah said in Kiddushin, in Perek Aleph, Mishnah Zayin, Kach gam mitzvah pri v'rivya, v'talmud Torah, opinyon Rabbein, u'melchemes Amolek, kol achas mehen mitzvah sei shelo azman gromo, ve'ein anoshim chayavis bohen. Elakulon Kabbalah Moshe B'Yam. So the bottom line is, you might have a drasha to tell you, but that's not the reason why the woman's potter. The woman's potter because of the Kabbalah. Okay, now I'm just going to do some reading and discuss some ideas, and Mitzvah Shem will pick this up next week because I don't think we can do anything that much here. But Reish Yud Gimel, HaMitzvah Sholish Esrei Umosoyim. He shetzivonu b'kid. Now, okay. Kapach. The question is, what is the mitzvah? So Kapach writes, Hatzivui shelitztavinu live all b'kiddushin. Okay. So Kapach says, why did I translate that like that? Because that's the way the lashon in Minyan HaKotzer. I'm not convinced about that at all, because the Minyan HaKotzer is quoting a different pasuk, and we have to ask ourselves what the mitzvah is and what does it mean. The words "livo b'kiddushin" is in Hebrew. We don't know what we're talking about. Livo b'kiddushin. What does that mean? How you translate it? Kapach claims that the proper translation of the Arabic is a kinyan of ishus, as opposed to a kinyan in a that you have in an item that you buy in a store. Bloy, in his dictionary, just says that this is kiddushin. So let's just assume the mitzvah shetzivonu b'kiddushin. So then it's v'lo says dova biyad o isha oy b'shtar o b'biyah. So first of all, the translation don't make no sense. Livo b'kiddushin, v'lo says dova biyad o isha o b'shtar o b'biyah. We just said livo b'kiddushin. The words don't make no sense. Okay, and then we'll see exactly the other way how it makes sense. Just give you something to think about. For them is all over Kiyikach ish isha uba. There's 3 times in the Torah, and you should look them up, that the Torah says Kiyikach ish isha. One is in this case where Kilu is marrying her, and then is another case where it's Motzi Shemra, and it's another case where it's the next mitzvah of Simach Mishta Shana Achas. So we have to just look at the pasuk and understand what the pasuk says and how we're learning the mitzvah. And the most important thing to keep in mind is the Rosh says there ain't no mitzvah because the Torah never has a tzivoy by kedushin. It just tells you that if you want to marry her, how you go about marrying her. Which is a hekish. Does the Ram quote the hekish in Mishnah Torah? Look in Perek Gimel Halacha Chaf. Ukmo chen lomanu she niknes bekesef. Me'omroi b'yomer v'riya ein kesef loden zeh avi yesh kesef loden acher u'mono av. And the Rambam has in Perek Gimel Halacha Chaf in Hilchos Isha different limud. But the important issue over here, Avo Kiddushin Doraisa Omnom Heim Mevuim Shein Bebir. The Rambam goes again and again out of his way that Kiddushin Doraisa is beer. So it means that Shtar and Kesef is not Doraisa. What does that mean? It's probably interesting and fruitful to look at Perek Aleph, Mishnah Aleph and Kiddushin, the Pirush of Mishnayos. There are many changes in the Pirush of Mishnayos, Shimadura Kamo and Madura Basra. It's kedai to look at it very seriously. Then to compare it over here to what's going on in Sefer HaMitzvos. And then, if you look at Perek Gimel, Halacha Chaf, there seems to be two maduras in Mishnah Torah itself. Then, another question you have to ask yourself. When you open up Perek Aleph, this pasuk, which the Ram quotes, and you see in Madur Kam, Madur Basra, how it's working out the pasuk. In Perish Mishnayos and Madur Kamo, he quote Ubo Eleho Usneya. In Madur Basra, he knocked out the word Usneya and threw in, tagged on also the pasuk Ba'ala. Check out in the Gemara Kedushin. Where do we learn Kedushin from? From the pasuk of Ba'ala Ubo Eleho. And in Mishnah Torah, in Perek Aleph, Halacha Aleph, he talks about the mit. He quotes only the pasuk. In Mishnah Torah, he doesn't quote a Ba'ala B'chlal. He quotes the pasuk, only the pasuk Ubo Eleho. And what does he have in mind? Another question you have to ask yourself is, what is the relationship between Kedushin and Nisuin? And another question is, what the heck? Why is the Ram so marich? What's it of interest in Minyan HaMitzvos? We're interested whether there's a mitzvah here or not. The three ways of getting married, whether the deraisa or not deraisa, are important for us. That seems to be very odd. Why is the Rambam belaboring the point over here? What exactly does he want? So, Mitzvah Hashem, these and other questions we will try to field and take care of next week in Mitzvah Hashem.